Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, friends. No matter where you're joining us today, welcome to Curious and Quirky, the podcast that unpacks innovation, pokes at conventional wisdom, and occasionally takes a union break before we've even started. This isn't your grandfather's podcast, though if he was anything like today's innovators, he'd probably be in the garage inventing a better way to do things. Now, each month we gather the brilliant, bold, and slightly rebellious minds from Caltech Executive Education to explore what leaders and teams mostly get right and the fascinating lessons hidden in what they don't. And since it's Labor Day, at least it's coming up on it, we're tipping our hard hats to the dreamers, the doers and tinkerers who know that real work isn't just about punching a clock. It's about building something worth clocking in for. So grab your coffee or your union approved cold brew or whatever fuels your genius, and let's get curious and maybe just a little bit quirky. All right. So some people work hard. I will say that some people work smart. Mary Abazia works brilliantly and teaches the rest of us how to do the same. She's the managing director of the Impact Planning Group, co-author of The Accidental Marketer, and a powerhouse instructor at Caltech Executive Education. With over 25 years guiding Fortune 1000 teams, she has a knack for turning strategic chaos into clarity and doing it with the steady confidence of a master craftsperson who's done it 100 times before. Now, today she's revving up a master class on outside-in thinking using Harley Davidson's journey from tattoo-worthy devotion to strategic detour as a cautionary tale. It's a high-octane lesson in staying true to your brand's core, keeping customers in sync, and building the kind of loyalty you can hang your skull cap on. Ladies and gentlemen, Mary Abazia.
Oh, Tim, that was really, really fun to listen to. Wow. Well, thank you very much. So I do have a question for everyone here. Would your customers ever tattoo your logo on their body? For decades, we considered Harley Davidson the gold standard for creating that emotional connection with brand. And they were the example of devotion so deep that riders would, put their logo on their body. So they didn't just sell motorcycles, of course. They actually sold authenticity and toughness. And they focused, if you remember, they focused on a very specific segment, middle-aged riders seeking freedom and being a rebellion. And they built one of the most successful communities. It was called HOG, HOG, or Harley Owners Group. And it was an exclusive tribe of riders. They had rallies and rituals. And it was a place where the members came together and they would, hang out and belong. And Harley, from a company standpoint, they were proof that if you could get your community right, you could get your business right. So it was a model that a lot of companies hope to have. But last week, it's a reminder of how far even the greats fall, or at least stumble. They sold 10% of their business. And also, their sales of their motorcycles dropped 28% from the previous year. So not good. So as they did this sale, it unlocked a lot of money. It unlocked $1.25 billion, but it was more just to give them a financial lifeline. There was no strategy in terms of reconnecting with their core or with their customers. Their bikes aren't getting worse. It's just that they're really losing their relevance, unfortunately. So, how did this happen? Real quick, it looks like around from 2014 to 2020, they were trying all kinds of different things. They were trying to expand. They launched a high-end electric bike, but they really didn't have a real market fit for it. And then they did try to expand into the younger riders, but they didn't have any emotional bridges that they were building with them. So they did all of this while they were deprioritizing that famous HOG program. And it was ironically, this is when it would have been really important to bring that on. Younger people, or a lot of us, are looking for ways to connect and belong. So what have other companies done that have been in similar situations and kind of seen the abyss of their business? One favorite I've been watching is Starbucks. A few years ago, they finally realized that they had drifted pretty far from providing that third place experience. Sales were flat. The brand sales, were stale and boring. So they doubled down, and now they're back to their roots, and they're trying to, invest in in-store experiences, barista trainings, really building back that community culture that they once had. And they're starting to regain their, not only their sales, but they're starting to get more relevance back with their target audience. And another one is Nike. They also they kind of weaved the wrong way, and they were starting to do a lot of streetwear, and they lost their relevance. So they've recentered back on the heart of their brand, and they're focusing in on performance athletes and rekindling relationships with some of the distributors that had gone awry. So what can Harley do in this situation? They're obviously not going to be able to just reboot that hog program, but if they can find what the target audience really needs, what's important to them again, such as their group is looking more for purpose than for power, and online they're gonna want to join something online before they ever go on the road and join. And one of the most important things that they do differently is vehicle ownership. They are looking at ride shares and subscriptions and starter packages. They're not into like this lifetime buy-in. So Harley can do it, but they're going to have to rethink and really go back to the heart of who they are. So how does this relate to you if you aren't a motorcycle enthusiast, or you're in a company and you're trying to figure out how to learn from Harley's lessons? It might be good to ask a couple of questions like, what is our core that differentiates us, and have we drifted? The second is are we mistaking any kind of loyalty for, lifetime contracts? And the third is are we building platforms for connecting, or are we just pushing out a lot of features? And the biggest question is, if our brand disappears tomorrow, would anyone even notice? So good luck with your brands. And now I'm going to introduce you to my dear friend and colleague, Bryan Mattimore, who is he's an idea guru, and he always teaches me something new. And so now we get to celebrate another holiday that I didn't know until now. So Bryan, I'm ready for this new holiday you have for us.
Well, thank you, Mary. I guess you could think of this as the sort of anti-Labor Day holiday, right? Today, August 15th, is it's National Relaxation Day. Okay. And you may say, oh my God, give me a break. And of course, if you look at, if you look at the data, you'll see that there are 5 or 10 or sometimes 15 different days for each day of the year, right? You might wonder how these get established. By the way, if you're curious, there is a Curiosity Day, and that's next month. That's September 17th. So how did National Relaxation Day get established? Well, you might be surprised to learn, as I was, as I researched this, it was invented by a 9-year-old, Sean Muller. He was a 4th grader in Clio, Michigan, and he did this in 1985. So this is the 40th anniversary of National Relaxation Day. They said, he was asked why he wanted to do this. He said, well, people think too much about working, right? Pretty simple, pretty direct. Now, how did this become, quote, national? Well, it turns out it was sort of in the family in a way. His grandfather was William Chase, and he was founder of the Chase's Calendar of Annual Events. He was a newspaper librarian, and in 1958, he saw a need for sort of formalizing in a book all these events that were happening around the country. And so the first edition, there were 32 pages, 364 events. It sold for $1. Okay. The publication still exists today. There are now, wait for it, 12,000 events listed in this 752-page publication. There's a circle and end to this story that's so wonderful. Sean has stayed to be an evangelist. He continues to be evangelist for this day. And in 2016, he started designating people around the country who were national relaxers, right? And the first one he chose was Erin Newkich. By the way, he married her 5 years later in 2021. So is the lesson here, start a national day so you can find a mate? I'm not sure, but there you go. So let's get real about what you could do to maybe relax, right? And this gets to, in our Curious and Quirky podcast, we try to be timely, right? So I believe I'm being timely here. I have a new book. It just come out. It's called Genius at Your Side, right? And the subhead is Solving Everyday Problems with Help from History's Greats. All right. So, and there are things in here like what's a smarter way to do a to-do list? That's Albert Einstein. Or how do I rate an impactful social media post? I had Ernest Hemingway do this. The bigger thought here for those listening is, especially those of you who have coaches, you might, add to your current coach by getting a dead coach, which is what I did here. These are all people who have passed. Yeah, Alan's freaking out. These are all people who have passed, but who can give advice. How do I lose weight and keep it off is in the book. And your coach is Harry Houdini, because it's magic. Another one is how do I remember more of what I read? And this is a homage to a Caltech professor, Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize winning physicist. He invented the Feynman diagrams, and of course, his recommendation is to make things visual. You'll remember him better. And on and on and on. I think one of my favorite ones is how can I better deal with a difficult boss or difficult people in my personal life? And so, who's the coach for that one? Drum roll, Mr. Rogers, right? So these are really fun, I think. So let's get back to National Relaxation Day. And the question is, in the book that this creative coach addressed is, how do I stop rushing through life? And our coach for that one is Walt Whitman. All right. And so Walt Whitman's formula for relaxation, it was sort of a three-word formula, if you will. It was loafe, observe, and praise. And the word loaf, you say, did he really use the word loaf? He actually did. They spelled it with an E back then, but he still used it. In Song of Myself, Whitman writes, I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my case, at my ease, excuse me, observing a spear of summer grass. And of course, this had bigger ramifications for his book, Leaves of Grass, which took him over 10 years to write. So it said that this isn't laziness, this is an act of sacred deceleration, which I love. So what are three things that we can all do to maybe relax? And this comes from Whitman's recommendations and the way he lived his life. Say yes to wonder. So pause in front of something you usually ignore, a paddle, a cloud, a brick wall, certainly a piece of grass, and ask, what do I see here I've never seen before? So that's number one. Number two is attend to the five senses, right? And also your breathing. And that can sort of help make you relax. And the final one, which is also my favorite, it's pick an ordinary moment, whether it's doing dishes or walking to the mailbox or whatever, and then either then or at the end of the day, write a sentence about it. And if you write it in poetry, I think it'll help bring out your inner artist. So Whitman might have described the sort of washing dishes as the warm water runs like memory across my knuckles, or whatever, So the notion is to pull out the inner artist in you by noticing things around you. And there's an infinite possibilities here. And that should help you relax. So that's what Walt Whitman, our coach, would recommend. Now I want to pass it over to Ginny. She is our workplace guru. And I don't know if she's going to tell us how to relax, but she's going to have. What are you going to tell us, Jenny?
I'm going to go the opposite.
Okay, great. That is an important creative strategy. Do the opposite.
I'm going to impart a large amount of anxiety. So, I'm going to talk about something that I call quiet admitting. And this is what CEOs are saying about their ability to handle today's business risk. And this comes out of a Korn Ferry survey where they surveyed 250 board of directors and chief executives. And the beginning of their findings, and I'm going to quote this, is beginning of the quote, the people running major corporations are quietly admitting something they've never admitted before. They don't know if they could handle what's coming. And I'm going to continue the quote. Across every major risk category, economic volatility, AI disruption, climate change, geopolitical crisis, only 11% of CEOs and board directors in the survey feel fully confident their firm can handle these risks. So, let me repeat this. 11% of those surveyed feel confident in their firm that they can handle these business risks. And I found that data to be certainly curious and a bit concerning. What makes the results even more curious is that experiences in helping the findings, leaders with more experience, so 20 plus years, are less confident in navigating what's ahead than leaders with less experience. So that's kind of interesting and what you wouldn't expect. But what this does tell us is that business risks today are unprecedented. These leaders have never seen anything like it. When the data got analyzed, the survey findings, they found that the risks did vary by industry, as you would expect. So consumer markets and industrial manufacturing, they're dealing with rising tariffs and supply chain disruption, something that Alan has been teaching us for these years. Financial services have concerns about their ability to manage global wars and border disputes. And even though tech leaders feel confident about AI, they feel less confident about economic volatility. So diving into this study, for me, the most notable finding was, of course, AI. As it relates to AI strategies across all industries, the report tells us, and I quote, it's a pretty powerful quote, leaders are panic spending billions with no promise of a payoff. So as Caltech, future skills faculty that we have gathered here, we focus on what it takes to be successful now and in the future. And this is what we've been discussing for the past several years. So yes, the world is changing. There are new technologies, new global challenges, new economic challenges, and we need to look into the future, understand the future, be prepared, and profitably participate. And the only way we can thrive while facing these new challenges is number one, to have great leaders, and number two, have enterprise-wide capability to adapt and change. These will always be current skills. These will always be future skills. So this is not new. Survey and reports have been citing this for years, yet there appears to be a trade-off in focus and investment. So let's start with great leaders. Again, there's needs to be a focus on what's new, but we can't take our eye off leadership. Great leaders don't magically emerge. Great leaders are developed very intentionally over time through experience, coaching, mentoring, and skill building. There cannot be a belief that, oh, leadership's a given. We got to focus on those things we don't know. No, leadership is not a given. And I'll go back to a really good quote from the Korn Ferry report, and I start the quote, "The push for digital skills is sidelining what really makes leaders great. Nearly 70% of the CEOs and board of directors ranked AI and tech skills as the top leadership priority for the next 3 years. Instead of focusing on what makes humans irreplaceable, creativity, trust, building relationships, organizations are pushing everyone to becoming better at the technical skills that machines will do anyway in the future. So we're kind of off focus here. And then the second part of this regarding change, I've been saying this probably every time, every podcast. Managing change is an imperative. It's the difference between organizations that are relevant and thrive and organizations that become irrelevant and die. This is not new, and it goes all the way back to Darwin. So I've got a dead quote for you, Bryan. Darwin, and I quote, and I love this quote: "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most adaptable to change." And that's Darwin's quote. So when it comes to managing risk, the survey cited cultural resistance to change as the top barrier. So even if there's a risk management strategy, even if there's an AI strategy, if there is organizational resistance and no capability to overcome that resistance, the strategies won't be successful. So, investing in people, we can't believe that's a yesterday thing. Investing in people is a today and tomorrow thing. So I go back to that quote that kind of scared me. So instead of the survey finding, which states, and I quote from the survey, leaders are panic spending billions on AI with no promise of payoff, I would like the headline to read this: businesses are investing billions on building leaders with a guaranteed payoff. So that is my anxiety today, but I'm going to breathe deeply after this so I can relax. So I'm going to hand this over to Alan, who is the guru on one of these top business risks that leaders don't know how to deal with: supply chain. So I'm handing it over to you, Alan. Help us,
Yeah.
please.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. And definitely not a dead supply chain guy here. So since apparently we're all talking about dying here. Today, I want to talk about supply chains that extend to the ends of the earth. And this is important because I have actually an interesting project that is going to take me to McMurdo Station at the Antarctic in February of next year. By the way, I'll talk to you all later about what it really takes to be able to get permission to go down there. It's been quite a ride. But I want to talk about supply chains because that's what I'm going down there to help with. So cutting edge research, it turns out, can't really be done without appropriate supply chain planning and management. McMurdo Station is America's Antarctic research station on the southern tip of Ross Island. So look it up on a map. You'll see it's really down there. It's probably one of the most remote locations and harshest climates in the world. It demands extraordinary supply chain management for everything from fresh vegetables to complex research and instrumentation. The population, depending upon the time of the year, grows from dozens to 1,000 people. This is a place where global supply chains cannot fail. They just absolutely cannot fail. And so there's a lot to learn about supply chains. And I've had a lot of conversations with people from McMurdo Station, both current and past participants and leaders there. And I've learned a lot. So I think it's going to be an interesting endeavor. McMurdo, just so you understand, is the logistical center of the U.S. Antarctic research operations. It consists of over 100 buildings, a lot of which date back to its founding. It sits on about 50 acres. It's been there about 6 or 7, I think a little bit over 6 decades. It's supplied. This is what's important to understand from a supply chain perspective. It's supplied by a single annual cargo vessel with about 400 to 500 containers. These are 20-foot containers. Additional break bulk cargo comes also on a separate following ship. Sometimes it's in that container ship. And then, of course, there's a tanker that comes and provides all the liquid fuel. So they use about 5 million gallons of liquid fuel a year, mostly diesel fuel. Everything in this supply chain is the equivalent of providing a small town. So food, carpentry supplies, plumbing equipment, vehicle parts, laundry detergent, toiletries, medical supplies, research camp equipment, including tents and backpacks and everything else, arrive in this annual supply vessel. So you have to get the supply vessel right. You don't get a second shot at this every year. The station is unique in that it actually does produce its own potable water, so you don't need to bring water. That's good. And it also has a hybrid electric system that uses diesel generators and wind energy. It would be impossible to run this on anything other than diesel generators and wind energy, perhaps maybe natural gas. But for the most part, there's not a lot of the year, there's no sun, so you can't use photovoltaics. What's also interesting is that all the waste products, I mean, all the waste products from human to business and to facility supply has to be shipped out every year. So the ship that brings in all the supplies takes out all the waste. It's an exceptional facility for its research that's being done there, and it actually was never meant to be a year-round station, but it has grown because of the research requirements, particularly around environmental issues, have grown so much. I talked with a retired manager of the site, and he said to me, it kind of reminds you of frontier days. People make do with what they have. They cobble things together to keep a piece of equipment running or to repair a building. A lot of that is obviously due to the uniqueness of their supply chain. One, it's a very long supply chain with very little technology to support it. It's basically a ship every year with all the predicted items that they're going to need for the next year. The second is that the vessel and fuel, since they come only once a year, usually in February, requires a fair amount of planning in advance and a lot of predictions. And this is where forecasting, which is oftentimes not done very well, needs to actually be done well. The mindset, he told me, about the people is really unique. He said that because the station is so remote and so different, he said, Alan, the people tend to be unconventional. They have a saying, he told me, down there, that you go down there the first year for the adventure, the second year to make money, and the third year because by then you don't fit in anywhere else. So these are rather unique individuals. So the question that I ask is, we've been doing a lot of Zoom sort of meetings with them, and the question that I ask and that I think about a lot is, what can we learn from McMurdo Station? And surprisingly, out of all the possibilities of technical lessons, organizational lessons, cultural lessons, and behavioral lessons, I think actually the technical lessons about supply chain from McMurdo Station are the least important. I know this because while the planning for the once a year shipment is complex, they don't usually run out of much stuff. And so if you look historically back through their data, they actually do a pretty darn good job on this. The most important lessons so far that I've learned without actually being there, and we'll test this when I get there, are the following. One, and I think these are really important lessons that can be applied in the supply chain world. One, resiliency of human spirit must come before resiliency of operations and supply chains. If you want a resilient organization and a resilient global supply chain, start with resilient people. Jenny, this changes the way we recruit for these kinds of jobs. This changes what we do in supply chains. Now that we're in a global supply chain world, we need to think about resilient people, people that aren't encumbered by time zones, people who aren't encumbered by 3 a.m. Supply chain conference calls periodically. We need to think about people who are resilient. The people side's important. Second lesson so far that I've learned is that supply chain resiliency has to understand that best can never get in the way of better. In other words, we have to focus on the mission at hand, not seeking the perfect solution for whatever reason. We have to remember that metaphorically or realistically, bad weather is always coming, and you need to be prepared before it arrives. Delaying to be the best can lead to catastrophic failure when unpredicted surprises or events that are unpredicted occur mid-project or mid-effort. The third lesson so far that I've learned from these frontier spirited people is that knowing the fundamental logic behind everything you do in your job is incredibly important. You can't just be trained on how to execute tasks anymore. You need to know the logic, the underlying logic of what you're doing, because this is what builds mental models that can be drawn out of your brain, drawn when the rule book runs out. When you can only get a shipment a year, and if you run out of toilet paper, you have to think about you have to have logic to think about what happens and how you're going to deal with that. Supply chain success, it turns out, often comes from improvisation, not just brilliant advanced planning. Improvisation is just as important because it takes up that mental model capability takes up when the unpredicted happens. And the only thing about unpredictability is that it clearly is predictable. Everybody that I've talked to so far down in the Antarctic station tells me the same thing. Every year, with like clockwork, by the third week they get there, there's something that they look at each other and go, didn't see that coming. I guess in the end, my father was right. It's all about people. And with that, I'd like to wrap this up and turn this over to our leader and our moderator today, Tim Boyd. Take it away, Tim.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Alan. And very good conversation on McMurdo Station. We'll talk about that in the follow-up, but lots of good thoughts on Ernest Shackleton's adventure from the early 1900s as he went down there and his resilience as a leader to maintain the human spirit on his disastrous expedition. So, all right. So, my name is Tim Boyd. We're here to talk about the era of burnout. Everyone is seemingly burning out in and around the world, especially when it comes to execution. And so one of the things that I want to talk about today is that burnout really isn't just an issue affecting startups or entrepreneurs. There's the typical iconic image of getting burned out. It's really become a cross-industry wide crisis of established organizations and large organizations and companies as well. Now, according to a 2025 McKinsey study, 82% of employees are experiencing or are at risk of burnout. 82%, that's a lot of people. And job burnout right now sits at about 66%, which is the highest on record since they've been tracking. And to be clear, I want to be very clear that this isn't simply a lack of resilience or because of a soft generation. It's about a work environment and a culture that has been shaped and molded to respond, I'll say, to constant urgency in fighting fires. We can't really afford to treat burnout as an individual weakness, someone who can't hang in there and hack it. We can't fix it with yoga apps and casual Fridays and the occasional mental health day. This issue is going to require significant change, and that change needs to be systemic. So when you look at the overall drivers of burnout, what's fueling the major push here, right? And so the research out there really points to four major drivers. The heavy workloads and the long hours. It's still the top trigger for about 40% of employees, according to Robert Half and his estimates. And we aren't talking about just a few hours above and beyond here and there, right? We're talking about a constant flow of overtime and working and grinding through execution constantly over time. Now, understaffing and rollover load is number two. Only 40% of employees feel their teams are staffed to succeed. Now, our staff generally today across the industry finds itself, I think, at the juxtaposition of technical leadership balance and individual contribution. And they're being asked to stretch more and more into leadership roles when they aren't ready, adding to that overload as well. The lack of recognition or support. We all know that people love to be recognized in some form or fashion, or they just want to be supported. Now, about 30% of folks feel that they aren't seen or valued. They want to be recognized and supported, and everyone has to be recognized and supported differently. And so we as leaders need to be able to figure out how to support the staff appropriately, and sometimes it has to be tailored to each individual. And the last piece is a culture of constant urgency or just saying yes all the time. And that's kind of amplified by all of these always on tools, right? Metrics and dashboards and everything else all the time, where everyone has access to every single thing that they possibly can, which erodes decision making and creativity, I think, to some extent. And to Alan's point, right, understanding the logic behind certain decisions and the value of that, I think, is still paramount to success. And so, what's the ultimate price if people aren't following these, or if they're just not really taking care of business here? For Gen Z and millennials, the burnout is now the main reason that they quit, and 73% and 68% respectively cited as a main driver of decision to leave a company. Now, but there's hope, right? There is definitely hope, and there's things out there that are moving to try to modify or break the wheel of this systemic issue. Now, in a recent six-country trial, the four-day work week reduced that burnout by 67% while maintaining that level of productivity. Now, my colleague Jenny Ertl, like many months ago, she's alluded to this when she discussed the trend of companies looking to shift to this model. And it's actually gaining a lot of traction across the world, especially here in the US as well. Now, companies that ignore the warning signs definitely end up paying for it. Now, the iconic example, at least in the near recent history, is TikTok. So, TikTok saw a large wave of extended mental health leaves tied to a high performance culture that was created. This is part of Business Insider. This, I think, was before the chaos that encircled the brand as threats were abound to shut it down and shutter the doors. But I do wish that that was the only example. All you have to do is really chat with a friend or the next generation, and you'll very likely run into someone with a few conversations dealing with the same issue. Now, the lesson I think overall ends up needing to be, actively shaping culture and changing things that no longer work, matter a lot more than making quick band-aid type of surface level fixes. We have to understand the root cause of the challenges and the issues that are arising, and really focus on those core systemic issues. As well as not just solving a problem and walking away. Many times I've seen a lot of people will solve a problem and try to fix it, but they won't follow up to evaluate the impact that change has had and whether a shift or a moderation or modification needs to be made, or a redirection, right? And this is, I think, where most organizations fail to deliver. Now, what can we do as leaders? I think generally we talked about this systemic and cultural change, right? We got to build a psychosocial safety climate, not a psychological safety climate, but a psychosocial, where well-being is openly supported, right? Mental health and emotional health and stability. You got to make sure we support that as well. Again, addressing all the root causes due to understaffing and inefficient workflows, all those types of things are really important for us to be able to make sure that we have the data to support the claims as well before we make a business decision, but we have to fix it. And then assigning senior leaders across the board who are accountable for organizational well-being. I think it's important for us to recognize that someone needs to be in the hot seat and needs to be held accountable for making sure things move in the right direction. Modeling leadership behaviors, modeling healthy boundaries, etc., making sure that people look to us as leaders for the next generation and the next steps. And then recovery and support, giving people as much flexibility as they possibly can, especially after a giant milestone. Give them some time off, let them go do their thing. If they were deployed for 6 months, let them take a vacation, let them come back, and don't just throw them back into the grinder and things like that. But really train your leaders and train your managers to have meaningful check-ins with employees that can try to catch the burnout early. Okay. And then generally speaking, as leaders, right, we have to be able to publicly acknowledge the vulnerability and that we have a challenge and an issue that we're working through. And I think that leadership vulnerability rebuilds trust within the organization as well. So a lot of these factors end up coming in to really try to mitigate and at least lessen the impact of burnout over the course of time. Now, you may be in a situation where burnout has already taken root, and we'll talk about that, I think, next month as well. But if it's already taken root, there's many other things you can start to do to try to either turn it around or try to deal with the situation and minimize repercussions that you may face as well. So, but really, when I think about burnout is really a tax that we pay when we confuse busyness with productivity. But it's a tax that we physically and literally should stop paying. Organizations that tackle, I will say this head on, see loyalty, they see innovation, and they see surges in performance because healthy employees, we all know, build healthy businesses. And as leaders, our job isn't just to meet the quarterly targets. That's a big part of our job, but it's not the only job. It's to build workplaces where people can thrive without burning out. And the question isn't whether we can afford to act, it's whether we can afford not to. And so I'll leave you with this quote: if we burn out our people, we burn out our future. And the most sustainable strategy we have is taking care of the humans who power it all. Okay. And with that, I'm going to invite everyone back to the table, and we'll have a conversation about some of the incredible topics that we discussed today, and a smattering of very different topics as well.
Hey, Tim, I had a question for Ginny, and that I guess it was 11% or feel that they're prepared for the future. I actually saw that as I don't know if it's a good thing, but I guess I saw it, the positive side of that is maybe that leaders are being more authentic in their assessment of the future, because this has always been the case, right? It's hard to predict the future, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. So I saw it, that unbelievably high figure, as a demonstration of honesty and authenticity. What do you think about that?
In a survey that's confidential, where they're admitting it without claiming who they are. You never want your CEO to get up in front of their organization and say, I'm not confident in the future. I don't know what the heck we're doing.
Right.
So yeah, it's a safe place to say that, they're not confident. I think taking that further to the leaders with more experience were less confident than the leaders with less experience. And maybe the leaders with less experience, are still resilient. They haven't been tainted by these challenges that the more senior people have. So it's kind of hard to say. It certainly is interesting that 11%, that I guess so many said they weren't prepared, but it still is kind of daunting to think about that. I would come back, just to kind of pull the thread here. Alan, when you talk about resilience and the human spirit, so important. And I think that goes to what Tim was talking about in terms of burnout. It's kind of the opposite of resilience,
Right.
and how important it is that a leader take the lead to own that. And I've seen it in some organizations where they're very conscious now of how the employees are doing from a burnout standpoint, how they're being managed, but I've seen it in surveys. So it's kind of a skip level survey where they're asking the employee, how's your manager doing? And then that manager gets rated on it. And to me, that is not the solution, because
Right.
every employee could game the system.
Sure.
It doesn't take the place of, Tim, what you talked about, meaningful check-ins, owning the relationship personally with your team. And I think that's important. And I think that's important for this kind of resiliency that we want to build in. You want to know that the person you're working for cares about you and values you. And I think that's a key part of this, keeping the human spirit alive.
Yeah, it's so important to have somebody who cares. And I'll give you kind of a metaphoric example. So you go into a typical semiconductor wafer fabrication facility. So this is a facility that's cost between $5 and $20 billion to build. And the equipment in there is incredibly expensive. And one of the most important human beings in that site is the maintenance manager. That maintenance manager cares about that equipment. There are preventive things. They pay attention to vibration. They pay attention to temperature. They pay attention to things that we all just take for advantage. But these are leading indicators, not that something's wrong, but something likely can go wrong. And I've thought for many years now, if leaders thought of people as equipment, they might actually treat them better. I mean, that's crazy to think about that. But preventive maintenance in these high-tech factories is so much more advanced than the human resource management side of dealing with people. There are indicators of burnout. There are indicators of stress. There are indicators of confrontational behaviors. There are indicators of harassment. There are all kinds of indicators. And just as we monitor, temperature, humidity, vibration, things like that for equipment to get ahead of it, we can do the same thing with people.
I just want to say, I think that's a brilliant idea. I mean, if we take sort of the Deming methodologies maybe and apply them to burnout, maybe we really got something here.
Yeah.
So thank you for that idea, Alan. I think it's a brilliant,
I love metaphors
creative
too.
strategy.
Metaphors make things very clear for me.
I got to tell you, take the 30 seconds to tell you this story. So years ago, I asked this HR person about I want to see the documentation on the annual performance evaluations and stuff of human beings. So she pulls a person's file out. It's about that thick, not very thick. And every year there's a 1-page evaluation, that basically checkbox. I said, that's very interesting. Now that copy machine over in the corner, let's go get the maintenance records for that. The maintenance records file was that thick. I said, "Oh my God! If we just treated our people like we treat the Xerox machine, we'd be so much better off."
It's such a brilliant idea. I love it.
Hey, Jenny, I had a follow-on question for you. You talked about how everyone's investing in the technical skills, right? Mostly, at least in companies, and not necessarily the leadership stuff. But what is the right balance between focusing on the technical skill investment versus the leadership aspect? I know that many people don't focus on the leadership stuff until it's absolutely needed and it's well laid at that point. But what's the right investment balance, maybe percent?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I don't know if there's a right balance, generally speaking, but it's certainly more than what we're seeing today. And what frustrates me is every CEO out there will say building leaders is important. They will all nod their head and say that. No problem. What they won't do is spend the time to do it and the money to do it.
Yep.
That is very difficult.
Yeah.
So all I could say is more than they're doing now. Maybe at least 30% versus, the little tiny bit they spend now. But my frustration always is they don't see the connection.
Yeah.
And they lose sight of that because they don't truly understand the value of leadership, and that is a frustration. Typically, if I get asked to do, let's say a change management, training for an organization that is doing an offsite, they will spend 90% of their time, maybe even more, on things like AI for 3 days, and then come in for 2 hours and teach us about change management, and you want to go.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
Tim,
so it's more than they're spending today. I could say that.
Yeah, I want to build on what Jenny is saying. I don't know the answer to that question. It's a brilliant question.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer, but here's what I do know. I do know that technical skills are the equivalent of a foundation under a house. It doesn't define the house, but it supports the house. I have this absolute belief that you need to be, if you're going to be a rocket engine engineer, you need to understand the physics and the engineering of that rocket. But that doesn't mean you have the skills to lead people to assist you in the development of that. But you need to understand it, because if you don't, you lose credibility. And if you lose credibility, you don't have their trust.
Yeah.
And so mastery of technical skills is at the end of the day, it's little more than the entry ticket to being trusted. There's so much more you have to do. But without that, you don't have a chance of leading people if they don't see you as competent and credible. So again, I don't know the balance. I don't know. I can't figure out how to put an equation to it. But what I do know from surveys that we've done, I do know in the supply chain world, the fastest way as you get older in your career, the fastest way to lose your job is to become technically incompetent. Incompetent not being a judgment or a value statement, just really being a clinical statement of you're not if people see you as not competent in
Right.
supply chain, you're going to lose your job. I mean,
Yeah.
you're and by the way, I'll tell you, in the supply chain world, if you lose your job and you're under 58 years of age, your chances of getting employed are dismally small. It's unfortunate, but because
Mhm.
the last bias that seems to be allowed is age bias, unfortunately, which
I
is
know.
crazy when I mean I got clients that are working into their 80s easily.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Tim,
I want to
Tim,
go
I have a
back.
question for you,
I'm sorry.
Tim.
oh, Mary, go
Um,
ahead, and then I have one. Yeah.
Thank you. So my question is, I really like that idea of measuring that burnout. Is there a study or something that we can point to or look at, and even be able to replicate some of those questions in other organizations?
Yeah, so I haven't found a specific, I will say a framework yet. I've still been looking for it, but I know that there's a lot of research out there looking at how to measure burnout, since it's such a complex topic. I haven't found a really good framework yet, but when I do, you guys will be the first to know, and be able to apply it because I think that I've always been fascinated with these ideas of playbooks, if you will, and whether they're software or system engineering or supply chain or leadership, whatever it may be, but being very open and honest with the organization and asking yourself 10, 20 questions, etc., and then building an assessment of where you stand on across all those questions that are supposed to be fairly large and kind of wide-scaping. So the same thing would apply here from a burnout. How close are you to the burnout? Are you beyond the precipice? And then you need to implement new things, right? If your organization is somewhat beyond saving, what do you do? Versus if you're think you're getting there, what can you do to prevent it, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So those kinds of things I think are important to be
And
able to understand.
unfortunately, it comes after the fact, when they start looking at attrition,
Yeah,
but it's too late. And that's
absolutely.
when
Right,
they kind of are
right,
starting to understand it. So they're
Yeah,
looking at attrition, they're seeing that, but then are they taking that learning back
right,
in?
right.
right.
That's
You know,
they yeah, do something with it.
Yeah,
one of the things I would love to see in that study, if you will, that future study is, there is a trend, small, but to companies to allow their employees to take as much time off as they want. They don't monitor their days off, right? And so I'm wondering if the burnout is less in those organizations, and if it's I suspect it may not necessarily be, because I think this is probably in part a challenge of the psychology of the worker, right? You want to look good. You want to,
yeah,
you want to be the go-getter. And so I think that would imply that we need training of our coworkers on how to avoid burnout for themselves, to work smarter, not harder, and all that
Right.
kind of stuff.
yeah. Yeah, I think to that point, Brian, I think it's important that you're seeing across the industry, across most companies, you're seeing a significant distancing from the idea of unlimited PTO as a perk. It's significant decreasing, and mainly because what they're finding is that the policy can lead to, I will say, employees actually taking less time off than if you have it accrued in your bank account, et cetera, and then you use it, et cetera. And there's also a lot more, I will say, organizational self-policing amongst employees that, you're taking another couple of days off, right? When we're all here in the grinder. And there's all this kind of toxic culture that gets somewhat created because of it. And in many cases, that's what these studies are showing. But I do think that there's a shift going away from offering unlimited PTO. Now they're offsetting with other benefits now as well, but the unlimited PTO idea, I think, just to be clear, I think is something that was going away.
Yeah, I might also add on the unlimited PTO, the state regulations, employment regulations have not caught up with that kind of a concept
Yeah,
also. In
yeah,
fact, there's plenty of companies that have found themselves in deep trouble with the unemployment boards and commissions over when somebody says, "Well, I didn't come for a week and or for a month," and that's just part of the unlimited PTO, and ultimately they end up being sued. In fact, the state actually, in the state of California, has actually sued companies over unlimited PTO policies, which is it's crazy. The world's just more complex than it always looks. I
I
yeah.
mean, we're
have an
sitting here thinking,
important question. I have to ask Alan one question. What are you going to pack for this trip? I mean, I can't
Yes.
even pack to go to the beach. How are you going to pack this?
Besides the
One,
toilet paper, go ahead.
Uh, so yeah, right. I'm definitely taking an
one
extra
full
roll.
suitcase.
I actually said this. I said this to my wife. There's some things that I'm just not trusting them with. So, so the list of things that I'm allowed to take is like 16 pages long. The list of things I'm not allowed to take is double that. And
Jeez.
so uh, don't need to take much clothes because when you get there, everybody has certain clothes they have to wear. Now, February is summer, so it's not real cold by Antarctic standards. So the answer is I haven't decided yet, but definitely the roll of toilet papers in the suitcase.
What's some stuff you can't take, Alan?
So you
Besides a microbiome, what? Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can't take any food, can't take any food whatsoever, any medication, well, if you have any much medications, that might just ban you from going. But
Yeah.
you can't. So, for example, you can't take vitamins without their approvals, um, and you can't take anything that will any chemical that can degrade or can harm the environment or anything. So
Wow.
but you can't take any food. You can't take a banana with you. I mean, now, and I'm going in on assuming the final approval is all done, I'm going in on a cargo ship and I'm coming out on the same cargo ship. So not only do I get to go there, but I get to get a ride on a container ship, which is
Mm.
an ice-breaking container ship, which is pretty interesting.
And the one coming out has all the waste products, right?
Yeah, we can talk later about the jokes on that one.
Yeah. Mike says you need to
The,
take a Caltech shirt.
that's right. I'm going out on the ship.
And if you missed your ship, you're at a
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
I love that comment where the retired general manager said after the third year they just can't work anywhere else. I thought
That's
that was they
that's
just kind of
funny.
I
I
thought
do
that
like
was a
that.
great
I do
and
like
and
that.
there are a dozen or so people that just they're there year round every year. Some have been there for 15 years.
All right. Well, on that, we'll wrap up this episode of Curious and Quirky. A big thanks to our panelists for showing up and showing us that meaningful work isn't just about grinding through it all the time. It's about curiosity, creativity, and the courage, right, to try something different. Here's to taking pride in the work that you do, finding joy in the ideas that you chase, and remembering that sometimes the best way to honor hard work is to take a well-earned break. May your workloads be light, your coffee be strong, and your next idea be the one that changes everything. Stay safe, stay curious, and of course, stay just a little bit quirky. See you guys next month.